All right. Next argument that they both make, fees. You got to pay fees somehow to vote. This gets back to their poll tax argument. Utter lie, built on paranoid fantasy, conceived and held by the devil himself to make these arguments over and over again to scare people. Now, this really has to stop at some point or another. At times, they start to argue against the photo ID point minimally, and then they remember that many, if not most of them, at one point or another, including some in the last few days, have said they're okay with photo ID, and so they don't argue with that one too much. But at the same time, they don't own up to the fact that every Democrat in here in the last Congress was, I believe, a co-sponsor of legislation that contained an ID requirement. Now, it was a little bit different than this one. The biggest difference was that it wasn't quite as tight, but there was a type of ID requirement in that bill. It's not that different. Now, they kept arguing also that this would disproportionately burden citizen voters, that it would be citizens that really would have to worry, and that this would end up resulting in the disenfranchisement of lots and lots of citizens. The senior senator from Rhode Island even went so far as to say a couple of things. I mean, I had to listen carefully when he started to say this, because I thought he was joking at first, or I hoped I was misunderstanding him. He started to theorize that, back to this point that orange man bad, so none of this can happen. We hate Trump. We can't trust Trump or anybody in his administration. Therefore, we're going to just say that all of it is unacceptable. He was saying that if this law passes, we can expect that the Trump administration might just willy-nilly cancel the voter registration files of anyone they felt like canceling. Somebody looked like they might not be a Trump voter, or something bothered them about this or that person, they might just willy-nilly say, when in doubt, throw them out. The senior senator from Rhode Island even went a step further in a way that pained me to hear, because it's so absurd. He said it's even something we should have to worry about, that the Trump administration could go in and just cancel all the voter registration files in an entire state. This is nonsense. That not only is that absurd to think that they would do that, to think they could get away with it, it's utterly at odds with the text of the legislation. Nothing in the legislation would allow them to do that under any circumstance other than where, having received the data from the states, they run it through their database and they identify people. These appear to be non-citizens. They then notify the states. These appear to be non-citizens, voters 1 through 5,000, whatever, however many there are. Even at that point, they're not removed. The state then does its job of going back through, and if the state believes that the federal authorities got it wrong, they can push back on that. The U.S. government, under this regime, wouldn't have the authority to just go in and say, he's gone, she's gone, get rid of this file, get rid of that file. They could flag things for the states, and it would be up to the states ultimately to remove them, but it's a collaborative, iterative process. It's not one in which they could go in and just say, this guy bothers me, get rid of him, or cancel all the voter registrations in an entire state. I mean, let's be realistic. That is not realistic, and it is absurd to argue, because it is utterly false that this bill, if it were signed into law, would have that effect. It's just a lie. Okay, next. The senior senator from Rhode Island had a real doozy with this one. He said, after doubting whether any of this occurs, let's not bicker and argue about who might be registered to vote as a non-citizen. It probably doesn't happen ever. If it does, it's only a little. Well, that's cold comfort to anyone in a jurisdiction that has ever experienced what happens when there's a close election and somebody wins by just a handful of votes. It's cold comfort to say, well, there are only a few non-citizens fraudulently voting. But separate and apart from that, he was saying the best way that we can handle this is just enforce existing law. You know how absurd that is? You know how sophomoric, shallow, simple-minded that is? Not to mention reckless and utterly dishonest that is. Let's work that through for a minute. What does that mean, enforce existing law? This is like the candidates who run for office by saying, I know how I will balance the federal budget. Just eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. Oh, gosh, we didn't think of that before. The difficulty lies in identifying it. You have to be able to identify the waste, fraud, and abuse, which we should do a better job doing than we do. It's one of the reasons why we had systems like DOGE, why we have things like rescissions packages. Wish we did them more often and more aggressively, but it's why we have them. It is not as easy as just saying, let's just do it. It reminds me